Good morning, everyone. I'm going to do a talk this morning on the mysticism of Plotinus. I've always been interested in Plotinus's philosophy and his way of looking at things. It's very poetic. So I cannot claim to be an expert on Plotinus. Most of my interest in this springs from his treatise on beauty in the Enneads, which is just a few pages long. But I was so struck with the teachings in that he has become one of my favourite philosophers. So let's start off by having a quick look at his life. He was born in Lycopolis, Upper Egypt, about 204 AD. His pupil and biographer, Porphyry, says that he did not talk much about his past, and it is said that he was ashamed to think he had a body. In his later years, he suffered from an intestinal complaint, but positively refused to use any of the medication that was made from animals. So you see, this idea is not as new as we think. He also refused to take animal food. He said that at the age of 27, he was struck by the passion for philosophy. And after trying several teachers, he eventually came to Ammonius Saccas, who became his guru. Under the guidance of Ammonius, he became interested in the system of philosophy adopted among the Indians. And just a few words now about Ammonius Saccas. H.P. Blavatsky writes in the Theosophical Glossary that he was a great and good philosopher who lived in Alexandria between the 2nd and 3rd centuries of our era, and who was the founder of the Neo Platonic school of Philalethians, or lovers of truth. He was of poor birth and born of Christian parents, but endowed with such prominent, almost divine goodness as to be called Theodidactus, the God-taught. He honoured that which was good in Christianity, but broke with it and the churches very easily, being unable to find in it any superiority over the older religions. And she also adds, in the key to theosophy, that Ammonius resolved to reconcile every system of religion, and by demonstrating their identical origin, to establish one universal creed based upon ethics. He wanted to show that we are all the sons of the same mother. In fact, his aims were identical to those of the Theosophical Society, and indeed the Neo Platonists were the first to use the name. So we can see what a brilliant teacher Plotinus had. After spending 11 years with Ammonius, he joined the army and went to Persia with the Emperor Gordian, and at the age of 40 settled in Rome, where he founded a school of philosophy. He was a voluminous writer, but Porphyry says that his handwriting was slovenly and that he was so concerned with the idea that he paid no attention to spelling mistakes and the like. His eyesight was also poor, so that he never reread what he wrote. The task of revising all his writings went to Porphyry. Plotinus moved in illustrious circles and had many followers among the elite classes. These included politicians and doctors. There were also several women amongst his disciples. Many of these, on the approach of death, had actually left their children in the care of Plotinus, as they knew they would be in good hands. He spent 26 years in Rome, many times acting as arbiter in differences of opinion. But it is said that despite his labour and interest in the affairs of many people, he was never interrupted, and his attention towards the supreme. One example of the power he had was presented by an ex-pupil of his named Olympius. This man became jealous of Plotinus and eventually resorted to black magic to try to injure him. But he found out that his spells merely rebounded back on him and said that Plotinus possessed a mighty soul, so powerful as to be able to hurl every assault back upon those that sought his ruin. I don't think, though, that it was a case of Plotinus being consciously hurling these assaults back, but just the fact that his aura was so pure that evil thoughts could not find an entrance, and so rebounded from his aura and back to the originator. Porphyry states that Plotinus had for an indwelling spirit a being of the more divine degree, and he kept his own divine spirit intent upon that inner presence. He also showed remarkable insight into character and could read the future with ease. He predicted the future of many of the children in his care with accuracy. But he was in total control of these powers as befits an adept. Once he was asked to take part in a ceremony to celebrate the new moon and propitiate certain spirits. Plotinus said, "It is for those beings to come to me, not for me to go to them." Porphyry writes that when Plotinus attended conferences, he showed a remarkable aptitude for going right to the heart of the subject. His phrasing was apt, although he made certain mistakes as regards some words. When he was speaking, though, his intellect visibly illuminated his face, and he radiated benignity. He had a thorough theoretical knowledge of geometry, mechanics, optics, and music, but because of his temperament, did not go practically into any of these. He also had a great feel for morality. One day, an orator gave a lecture at a conference and maintained that a pupil should submit to his teacher in all ways, without reserve, including a sexual one. Plotinus started up several times to leave the room, but forced himself to stay and afterwards asked Porphyry to write a refutation, which he did. And Plotinus was so pleased with it that he said, "So strike and be a light to men," which is a quotation from Homer. So Plotinus continued to teach in Rome, indeed being a light to men and women. He eventually contracted a malign form of diphtheria, and slowly but surely his sonorous voice lost its music, his eyes became dim, and ulcers formed on his hands and feet. One of his pupils, Eustochius, was present when he died. Plotinus said to this man, "I have been a long time waiting for you. I'm striving to give back the divine in myself to the divine in the all." As he spoke, a snake crept under the bed in which he lay and slipped into a hole in the wall. At the same moment, Plotinus died. The year was 270 AD, and Plotinus was 66 years old. There's not much time in a short talk like this to go into the philosophy that Plotinus and the other Neoplatonists followed. What I'm trying to do is to deal with Plotinus himself. So I will just give a brief outline so we may gain some more insight into the man. The most important thing in this philosophy is the ideal of the one, from which all proceeds and to which all returns. From this one, the divine mind emanates, and then the all soul. The one is beyond the range and reach of thought. Morally, This principle is referred to as the good. Other designations attached to it are the simple, the absolute, the transcendence, the infinite, the unconditioned, and sometimes the Father. It is unknowable in its nature, while we remain mortal beings, of course. Next, we have the divine mind. Stephen McKenna, who did a translation of the Enneads, refers to this as the intellectual principle and writes that this divine thought is, of course, a real being, the first thing of which existence may, if only in some vague sense, be affirmed. It is an intelligence, or rather, the universal intelligence. So it is the highest that is in any way knowable. And with this divine mind begins the existence of plurality. McKenna says that the intellectual or intelligible universe is the totality of the divine thoughts, generally known in the phrase familiar in Platonism as the ideas. The teaching of the Neo Platonists is that these divine thoughts are actual beings, the archetypes of all that exists in the lower spheres. Students of the secret doctrine will have no trouble in equating this with the teachings concerning dhyani chohans and dhyani bodhisattvas, etc. The third of Plotinus's divine triad is the all-soul, which is the eternal emanation and image of the intellectual principle. This probably refers to the planes of existence into which the divine mind incarnates, so to speak, and therefore gives them their certain qualities, which distinguishes one from the other. Of course, this is an oversimplification. Plotinus also taught much about the various hierarchies of being. As this is meant to be a short talk, I won't stray into that, it will just make things very, very complicated. For the purposes of this talk, I'd like to say a few words about Plotinus's view of man, or should I say, the views of the school that he followed. Again, I'm referring to Stephen McKenna's foreword to his translation. The all-soul being what it is, man is as much a part of it as anything else. As a living being is a divine soul, particularized for a space of time. Divine soul particularized for a space of time. We have three phases of the divine soul in us, and these are classed as 1, the intellective soul or intuition, the reasoning soul, and 3, the unreasoning soul. From further reading of McKenna, it seems that the intuitive soul can be equated with what we call in theosophy buddhi, as its quality is direct perception of the divinity in man. The second, the reasoning soul, can only come to this realization by stages. Therefore, we could say that this is the higher mind, or the higher aspects of our mind in the theosophical system. And third, the unreasoning soul, we can say is the lower mind, which just deals with day-to-day things and material ideas and concepts. And this is what this is only what I've deduced from my research. McKenna writes, the main need, the cry of man's nature, is to become actually, as he is always potentially, divine. All his faculties, images, each of its next highest, culminate in the intellectual principle of intellective principle. The intellectual principle or intellective principle, which I've talked earlier about being related to the intuition or true knowing faculty. And his duty, or rather the highest happiness, his blessedness, his deepest inner voice, is to labour his entire being into identification with this, the divine, in an ecstasy away from all the lower and first from all that links him with matter. I would add here that this means the binding quality of matter. He may even in this life attain to the possession of the Godhead in an ineffable act of identification, become uniate, one with God or the divine, actually God. And foretasting this blessedness of the final return, after which he is for all the space of eternity to be with the Godhead, to be divine, or to be God. Of course, in the Neo Platonic philosophy, there's no idea of he attached to the word God. And it has a completely different meaning from the God that the Christians and the Muslims talk of. I prefer to use the word divine, divinity, than God. Stephen McKenna gave his life to translating the Enneads. He had said that to translate them was worth a life, and indeed he proved it. He was a Unitarian for a while. His room was full of images of the Buddha, though he never called himself a Buddhist. The story of the translation and the obstacles he had to overcome would make an interesting lecture in itself. I think there's a great value in studying people like Plotinus. We contact their minds, their very souls, and we are illuminated by that and enriched as a result of it. We are spending some time in blessed company. It is an exercise I would heartily recommend. Well, I'm only on the fringe of my talk and it's almost time to finish, so I'll leave the last words to Plotinus. I don't think our studies are any good if they're not of practical use to us, and infinitely more importantly, to others. We can see from Plotinus' life that his philosophy made him gentle and compassionate to all beings. So this last bit of practical advice from him should take root in our hearts and souls. It's a quote that I've used quite a few times over the years. He says, "Withdraw into yourself and look. If you do not as yet see beauty within you, do as does the sculptor of a statue that is to be beautified. He cuts away here, he smooths it there, he makes this line lighter, this other one purer, until he disengages beautiful lineaments in the marble. Do you this too. Cut away all that is excessive, straighten all that is crooked, bring light to all that is overcast. Labour to make all one radiance of beauty. Never cease working at the statue until there shines upon you from it the divine sheen of virtue, until you see perfect goodness firmly established in stainless shrine. Have you become like this? Do you see yourself abiding within yourself in pure solitude? Does nothing now remain to shatter that interior unity, not anything external cling to your authentic self? Are you entirely that sole true light which is contained by space, but not confined to any circumscribed form, not diffused as something without term, but ever unmeasurable as something greater than all measure and something more than all quantity? Do you see yourself in this state? Then you have become vision itself. Be of good heart. Remaining here, you have ascended aloft. You need a guide no longer. Strive and see. So this gives a view of human nature far removed from the modern materialistic and cynical one. Only the mind's eye can see this beauty. But if it is weighed down with vice, it will see nothing. Plotinus also says, no eye that has not become like unto the sun will ever look upon the sun. Nor that is any that is not beautiful can look upon the beautiful. Let each one therefore become godlike and beautiful, who would contemplate the divine and beautiful. So there's good advice for us all here. It's important to take the inspiration of such lives and to realise that we all have the potential to become like Plotinus and others. All the other great spiritual teachers of humanity. The divinity that we share is the birthright of everyone on this earth, regardless of race, creed, sex, caste, or colour. And there are no special gifts given to the few, all is worked for. So let us all be inspired to work to the best of our own ability. Let us, like Plotinus, strive to give back the divine in ourselves, to the divine in all other beings. Thank you for listening. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace. Peace on earth and goodwill to all beings.